Do you want to learn practical strategies to help you navigate an ever-changing world as you get older? Well, in this week's episode, I'm joined by Bradley Schurman, who is the author of SuperAge, and he's an expert in demographic change and the impact longevity has on our economy, on businesses, and even our homes. Bradley has spent years studying how these aging trends impact our lives now and in the future, and he's going to be sharing some actionable insights for how we can future-proof our own lives. So whether you're looking to adapt to new trends, plan for your long-term success, or simply stay ahead of what's becoming a very unpredictable world, this conversation is packed with tips you won't want to miss. Welcome to This is Getting Old, Moving Towards an Age-Friendly World. I'm Dr. Melissa Batchelor, and I am a nurse and a nurse practitioner with over 25 years of experience caring for older adults and their families. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to share a few of the different ways that you can connect with me. You can go to my website, melissabphd.com, and sign up to be an HYSU Insider for free. And there you will find about 10 of the different handouts that I've mentioned all in one place. But if you upgrade to become an HYSU MVP member, you'll have access to all of the digital handouts that I've created, plus a hub of videos, resources, and courses that I've organized by subtopic, which makes it even easier for you to find the information that you're looking for. I also host a monthly live Q&A webinar with my MVP members. But you can also become a member on YouTube, and depending on your level of membership, you will get early access to my weekly episodes, but you can also join me for a monthly live Q&A webinar, or you can tune in weekly for a live stream with me on Tuesdays at 5. So now let's dive into today's topic about practical strategies to future-proof your life. I'm joined by Bradley Schurman, who's the founder and CEO of Human Change and founder of New Rules Media. So welcome, Bradley.
Thank you.
And before we get started, maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So I am a demographic strategist, meaning shortly that I study populations, I study population aging, I study our birth rates, our death rates, and everything in between. And I help organizations understand how these demographic shifts are impacting their business and their bottom line. But I have a long history working within aging, having spent most of my career at a little organization called AARP, which I imagine most of you know. And at that organization, I brought topics of aging and demographic change to the OECD, the World Economic Forum, really raising them up in the global conversation about our future. But a big part of the future is today and how we vision ourselves living in the coming years. And, you know, if you take a look at any bit of data anywhere that polls adults, no one wants to leave their home. And as part of my practice, we work with organizations and some homeowners too, to help them think through how to future-proof their place where they live. Because for some people, moving today because of the cost of housing is impractical or ill-advised. For others, it might be hard to get a loan, especially if they're in that 65 plus category.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take some smart steps to adjust the place that you live through some modifications and really some light touch stuff, you can create an environment that extends your runway for independence. In addition to all of this work, I have a media company that I co-launched this year called New Rules Media. And you can find us at newrulesmedia.substack.com. And we take a look at all of the big issues that are impacting Americans and people overseas today and how they intersect, everything from changing media landscape to climate change to, of course, demographics.
Okay, and you're also an author. So
I am.
Book called SuperAge. So maybe just tell us a little bit about
oh, that thing.
just that little bit.
So I wrote a book called The SuperAge. It was published by HarperCollins in 2022. But it is a future cast book of what direction we're going in as a country, as a world, as it relates to our demographic future, because we are in a period of disruptive demographic change. These are slow-moving trends, but they are trends nonetheless that are hitting us head first right now. And it's really the intersection of two big trends. Declining birth rates is the first one. People want and are interested in talking about babies and the fact that women are having fewer of them today than they were just 10 or 20 years ago. And we have extended longevity. And that means that more people than ever are living past the age of 65. In fact, some have called this period peak 65 because of the boomers' influence on extending longevity.
Well,
But it is,
and the fastest growing demographic are centenarians, people
yeah,
turn
they are. They
100.
are. The fastest are centenarians. The second, actually, the fastest are centenarians. Second is 80 plus. So there's just this explosion at the top, and that's caused a lot of people to be concerned because historically, at least in our lifetimes, not the whole backdrop of human history, around 65, we tend to usher people out of the workforce, usher people out of society. And in the 20th century, we almost industrialized this process, which may sound like a weird thing to hear, but we put older adults into ghettos. We actually encouraged it, whether that was long-term care communities, assisted living, retirement homes. We said the dream is to move to Florida or Arizona. And that doesn't really jive with the economy today, the way the dependency ratio is. So to meet the future, one where there is really good economic prosperity, where there is greater levels of inclusion, we need to figure out and quickly how to reverse this trend, how to bring us back to a historic norm where older adults lived alongside us, or in some cases with us in our own homes.
Right.
They stayed in work till they couldn't work anymore. And they remained active and contributing, because right now the path we're on is actually quite dystopian. We have a dependency ratio that is so far off. And for those of you who don't know what a dependency ratio is, it means that the number of people out of the workforce is not balanced with the number of people in the workforce. So we have too few people paying taxes, actively consuming, and too few people not. So this could cause a catastrophic event to happen, but it won't happen like this. It won't happen overnight, but we'll see, if we continue on this path, a real erosion of the bedrock things that we frankly take for granted. Things like social welfare. In just a few years, Social Security and Medicare become insolvent without a fix. So on one hand, people will lose a chunk of their retirement income, about 25%, yet at the same time, they'll see an increase in the premiums they have to pay. So without moving in this direction to change things, we can anticipate a spike of homeless people that are in their retirement years. And frankly, that's not the kind of place that I want to live.
Right. I mean, I know it's a huge issue. I work with 6 different age-friendly cities, and homelessness in older adults is like a major concern. Um, and then I was actually in a meeting Wednesday this week with a CCRC, and there were older adults on this panel talking about why they chose that option. Now, only 4% of Americans can even have that option.
Or to CCRC, right?
Right. And then but there are 2,000 of them in this country, which I thought was interesting, to know that there are that many. So that's like a whole different conversation, but it got me thinking about, I mean, I'm just entering my 50s, and, the price of housing is continuing to go up. And it's like, so if you were an older adult, who paid your house off, but the taxes continue to go up, but you are on a fixed income, I mean, I think those are the things that set the stage for people that end up being homeless.
Well, and it's not just taxes that are at issue here. And of course, that's a prevailing challenge for older adults is rising taxes. They're also rising insurance costs. If you're living in a state that isn't necessarily climate resilient, a state like Florida, a state like Arizona, a state like Texas, you're starting to see your insurance premiums go up pretty substantially.
Mhm.
And, in Florida, it's between 30 to 40% each year, these increases. And there are more stories than I can count of people who move to Florida with this dream, because we have this dream of retirement, what it is, walking along the sandy beaches, playing golf. That's what we've been spoon fed for
Or
decades.
pickleball.
Yeah, or pickleball now. But that reality doesn't jive, that idea doesn't jive with reality. And now, and there's been reporting across the major press now, which I think really shows how big of an issue this is now, where retirees, people past 65, are now having to work in retirement just to pay off the extra taxes, pay off the extra insurance costs. And in places like Florida, where there are new mandates on condo buildings in terms of these condos having the reserves to make the repairs needed for climate change, they've got underlying mortgages that they have to pay now. One woman, I think she was in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, bought a $400,000 condo, and now she's got an underlying payment of an extra $100,000 that she has to figure out how to pay now. So she's literally working to live, working just to keep that house, which she thought she could have forever.
Right. And then you throw in this pesky thing called health.
Yeah,
And
that little
if you
thing.
have a healthcare issue, then that depletes your savings and
Sure.
things like that. So I wanted to, so let's move on to a little bit more positive
Yeah.
side of things. But maybe let's talk a little bit about why companies need to pivot, to more inclusive design, in their product development and their marketing.
Yeah. Well, I think first, it's good to be a little scared. It's good to think a little bit about the gloom and doom, because there is a pathway out, and there is a positive pathway out for individuals and organizations if they realize that the change is just a part of life, and our aging is just a process that we all get to go through if we're lucky enough to have extended longevity. And I assume most people know that, at least in the back of their heads, but there's a difference between knowing it intrinsically and then acting on it, then actually doing something about it. For
Yeah, so just
businesses,
acknowledge it.
this is a big market opportunity right now, especially in the group that is basically age 50 to 74. And you're probably asking yourself, why that number? Well, 50 to 74, some changes happen, you enter retirement. 50 to 74 is also a big chunk of prime earning years, when you're actually earning a lot of money, when you're spending a lot of money, where you're maybe taking care of mom and dad, maybe taking care of children. And then 65 to 74, typically, and of course, there's variable here for people, those are the first 10 years of retirement. And spending during those 10 years tends to stay at or above what your spending was from 50 to 64. So there's a real opportunity for businesses to come into this space right now and say, hey, we want to capture you as a marketplace. We want to talk to you as consumers. But let's be fair here. A 50-year-old consumer, a 65-year-old consumer, a 74-year-old consumer doesn't look like a 20-year-old, doesn't act like a 20-year-old, doesn't have the resources of a 20-year-old. So by building products with inclusivity in mind, not just building for older adults, not just building for younger adults, but building products that actually look and feel like the population in its totality, then you can have some really great results as a company. And I think, one of those companies that I preach about is Apple. Apple is a product that people love. It doesn't matter what age you are, people love Apple computers and Apple devices.
Mhm.
And why is that? Well, Apple does two things. Not only do they build inclusivity and accessibility into every product they make, but they also talk about it. They talk about it, and they don't talk about it through an ageist lens or an age lens. They talk about it through what the product actually does, how the product can actually help you. So for a younger person, they pick up an Apple Watch, for example, and they might be thinking about it through the lens of, this is a really cool device. I really love to have it. I can do fun things. I can make calls, yada, yada, yada. But for an older adult, and frankly, for somebody like me, I love it for the health stuff. I love being able to monitor my health outcomes and my progress on that device. And Apple then is able to kill essentially two birds with one stone. For individuals, thinking positively about the future means that you want to build resilience into your home, into your life. And to do that within the physical environment actually does require some investment in how your space works, and assessing, quite frankly, in that middle-age period, that 50 to 65, maybe up to 74 period, what you want your future to be. And this is hard for a lot of people because you have to take into account your mortality. You have to think about worst case scenarios. And none of us really want to think about our decline. That's pretty macabre. But if you do think about it, you can build resilience into your home. So I live in an 1895 Victorian in Washington, D.C. It's 18 feet wide. The chances of this home being age-friendly, perfectly age-friendly, perfectly inclusive for my future are next to zero. It doesn't mean, though, that I can't make modifications to it to extend my runway if I need to. Or at this point in my life, or in 10 years, make a jump to a place that actually will allow me to extend my runway. My parents just went through this process with me, and we renovated a home from top to bottom. It is fully inclusive in its design. It's fully accessible, meeting those ADA standards at almost every turn. But guess what? It's beautiful. It doesn't feel like a nursing home. It doesn't feel like a hospital. And that's where we're going. That's where we're going if people want to go in that direction. And they should.
Right. So a couple of things, just to circle back with the Apple does talk about inclusivity and the accessibility features that they are building into it. They also don't do it from an ableist kind of perspective.
Correct.
So I do give them kudos for that. And with the Apple Watch, when I bought my first one, I was like, "Oh, this is great! Like this is a great thing. Older adults should have this because it now detects falls."
Mm-hmm.
Well, about 6 months later, I was walking my dog through the woods and got a call and forgot that there was somebody coming to meet me to put a fence in for the dog. And I was 15 minutes away, and I'm like, "I will be there just as fast as I can. Sorry, I forgot." So I turn around and I decide I'm going to get there faster. So I start running and tripped on a stump, and I went down.
Yeah.
As I'm laying there, my watch is saying, "You appear to have fallen." And I'm like, "Well, this is age friendly."
Yeah.
It's good for
Yeah.
everybody.
It's just smart. And when they talk about the fall feature in particular, they don't talk about it through the lens of like life alert. Like they're not talking about the old lady on the bathroom floor screaming, "I've fallen and I can't get up." They're talking about it through the lens of somebody mountain biking in the woods. And the reality is, because there is a pretty significant cohort of people that are older now that are really active and doing these types of things, they're not just speaking to the younger people who mountain bike, they're also speaking to the older adults that mountain bike as well.
Yeah. And there's, other health conditions too, while we're on this train of thought, that if you have a child who has epilepsy, there's an app that you can get, and you both, put an Apple Watch on your child, and then you'll get an alert, and you're able to pinpoint and find them through the technology. So
yeah, and this is really the underlying story of inclusivity, and why when we build this way, we think about product, service, our home through the lens of inclusion versus just, "Hey, that looks good," or "Hey, that just works for me," or "Hey, that just functions for that specific user group," that tiny little user group that we're targeting, 18 to 34, for example. We miss out on big opportunity. So the future really is about inclusion, especially as our markets start to change. So we are seeing this big influx of older adults right now, but marketers need to understand too, and people who run businesses, that the generations Z and Alpha are significantly smaller than the boomers. There were 76.
But the millennials are bigger.
They are, but millennials are a big generation, but they're still smaller than the boomers were. And Gen Z is even smaller than them, and Gen Alpha will be even smaller than them in terms of births. This is just math. So for businesses, when they're thinking about the basics, like I need to hire people to do jobs, to work and actually produce things,
Mhm.
and I need to have people who actually are able to consume things, our attitudes towards just focusing everything on young people as a source of labor, as a source of consumption, it's kind of foolish for the near future, because things are turning around so quickly. And to the positive note, excuse me, we're seeing a lot of positive things happening right now in terms of who's actually selling product. We see Michael Stipe, repping Yves Saint Laurent alongside Diana Ross. We see these aspirational figures right now extending their working lives, whether that's in politics or entertainment, as heads of industry. They're actually showing us what the future looks like. And it's a future coming very quickly. Um, Labor Department in this country projects that the fastest, not only projects, it says explicitly, the fastest growing labor pool in this country now is people over 75, followed by people over 65.
Mhm.
And the fastest contracting labor pool right now are people ages 16 to 24. So it's just math, it's just fundamentals and leaning into what the future actually looks like, not what we think it should look like
Right.
or what we believe based on previous years what it will look like, because that's faulty.
Okay, so now let's pivot a little bit and discuss some practical strategies for changes that people should be thinking about that they could do today that will create a better tomorrow for
Sure.
themselves.
Well, you have to look at multiple areas. So let's start with the home. um, People who are middle age, like I said, that 50 to 74 kind of group, they are the ones who spend the most on home renovations. It's that time when people actually consider doing something to their home. So this is a time where if you're really serious about your longevity and you're serious about loving your home and wanting to stay there, um, you need to think about how to position that home to meet the future. And that includes thinking through some things like, will I need a wheelchair at some point? And can this house accommodate it? Can I get from the first floor to the second floor without the use of a wheelchair, without the use of an elevator, rather? Um, these are all things that people need to think about now. I think even though it's not where most falls happen, but it is where the most catastrophic falls happen, is that people have to be really serious about their bathroom. And not just can I shower, but also can I toilet? And I'm sure people had a little cringe when I said that, but like, we like to use the bathroom by ourselves. And you can purchase product now in the marketplace that is very elegant, um, seamless in its design, that can go into your bathroom and make it work and look stunning at the same time, not make it look like a hospital bathroom, which I know is everyone's underlying fear, because you basically have two groups of people. You've got the designers that do all the beautiful stuff, and you've got the occupational therapists that do the kind of healthcare stuff. And there's not a lot of folks in between that try to marry those two together, making a space that actually works functionally, but has the aesthetic as well.
Yeah.
So, a roll-in shower doesn't need to look ugly.
Correct. And I actually ran into a student here probably a couple of months ago, and he's going to school to be an architect. And I was like, you definitely need to always be learning more about older adults and talking to them when you're doing your designs. And he was just like, really? And the more we talked, at the end of it, he goes, I would have never like thought about that. I said, well, now, you're 25, 26 years old. Yeah, as you go through your career, you should definitely be thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a growing market, and for those people who are in it, they really have an opportunity, especially on the lower end of the 50 plus, to make the modifications to their home, that will really extend their life there. And I think that's really empowering. That's a positive thing. I mean, you can also take a look at some basics. How do I incorporate technology into the home? Less reliant on things like switches and plugs, more reliant on automation, to make sure that things like the lights come on at the same time every day, making sure that not only do the lights come on, but they're the right brightness. So you're not living in a dark home, which is more prone to accidents. But then like really little things that people can do too. Like if you have rugs in your home, which many of us do, tape down the corners. It's so rudimentary, but it really can have a big impact. And of course, you want to make sure that if you can, you're removing any thresholds between rooms or doorways, because those can be barriers. My parents have one threshold in their house that goes from the inside to the outside. And they remarked last week that their friend, a close friend of theirs who has a walker, couldn't get over it. So it's not just people in wheelchairs that this impacts, it's people that aren't as well.
Yeah.
So it does require a lot of really critical thinking. In the kitchen now, I love my gas stove. I won't be putting a gas stove in when I do my next renovation. And the reasons for this are multifaceted, but the big one is gas emissions in the house aren't great for your health. That's one thing. But the other thing is the safety piece. The stove turns off and I don't have to think about it. And that is actually a really empowering thing, especially if, again, thinking through worst case scenario, you might have memory issues or dementia, Alzheimer's in the future. You don't have to have that additional worry there. And again, nobody sees it. It's all there right underneath the surface or right on top of the counter. And it really does change the way the space works in a positive.
Yeah, I've got an episode about how to create an age and dementia friendly home, and it's the same. A lot of what you just said is included in that. Including like when you walk into a room, there's some type of motion sensor that turns the lights on for you. And then like my grandmother was staying with my parents, and she needed a grab bar in the shower and in the bathroom. And my mom is a decorator and my dad is a builder.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, you're not putting that bar, you're not just going to stick the bar up there. I want like, a routed, edged, wooden board, and we'll paint it and stain it. And then we'll put the bar on that and then put it on the wall.
Right.
So it looked good. And I think, that's not typically something that you'd be used to seeing in a home, but
Right.
just kind of saw it and you were just like, that's nice.
Well, I was taken, my thought before that, my parents went through this process. My father had a stroke, which he mostly recovered from. But during his rehabilitation process, they said you have to put a bar in your shower, which they did begrudgingly. And because they hadn't planned for it, this was a Home Depot special. It was the ugly aluminum bar. And he resented that being in the bathroom. He didn't like it. It wasn't aesthetically great by any stretch of the imagination. It looked hospital-like. And I said, how are you dealing with this thing in the bathroom? And she said, I love it. And I said, wait, what? I love it, was her response. I said, why? She goes, it makes shaving my legs so much easier.
Yep.
So we have to force a break in how we think about these things too. We think about them through the lens of age or disability. And there's a lot of natural negative connotation that goes along with that, because we've been fed for all of our lives that getting older is bad, that disability is bad. And because of that, we've got all this underlying bias that prevents us from doing the smart thing, the right decision. But if we think about it through the positive side of it, like, oh, this helps me do things like shave my legs, or, it's easier to get it in and out of the room because the door is a little wider. That's actually really empowering for folks, because they're actually improving upon the home, not taking the home to a place that might look medical or feel like it's in decline. And because we associate things like hospital medical devices with decline, and if we have them in our home, I think it starts to really degrade our psyche about who we are and whether or not we're actually fit and healthy and It's probably a bit of a four-letter word, but normal. I mean, people aspire to be normal. And if your home looks like it's not normal, that will impact your attitude, that will impact your mental state about your future. That's just.
Yeah, as you were talking, it made me think of another example. I was helping a family friend. They had a step down in from their kitchen into like the sunroom,
Mhm.
and it had caused a couple of falls with one of the parts of the couple. And so went over there to try to I was like, they were trying to figure out how to level that, you know,
Mhm.
and but they had doors. And so what we end up doing while they're making that decision is just close one of the doors and put a little stop, pause, and like step, some type of sign, because it wasn't just him, like a contractor had come over, same thing, hit his toe like on the little flush, not part that wasn't flush, and almost fell into the sunroom. So just by closing that door and putting a sign up, it just was a reminder, and an alert that that was a change in the leveling there.
Yeah, and you can always use color too. If you can have color in a space like that, if you use color as a contrast, it can really help with wayfinding and alerting people that an obstacle exists. Um, Also little things, handrails. I was speaking with a prospective client last week, and she was very adamant about not putting an elevator in her home yet. She didn't want to do it. And I get that. Like, it's disruptive, it takes up space, and you may never use it. But she said, but we live on the second floor. What can I do? And I said, second handrail. She said, what? I said, just a second handrail will give you that extra bit that you need. And she was kind of blown away. And I said, everywhere where you have a place that you can grip is a good thing.
Yeah,
So
but
even in the kitchen, you can put grab bars in on your island. You can put them next to your stove, and you treat them as a towel rack. So they kind of blend into the environment.
yeah, and I would say I would probably gone a little bit different and encourage the grab bar first,
Mhm.
because it keeps her functional and climbing the stairs. And
Yes.
older adults that climb stairs, I think it's like 6 flights of stairs a day or something, like
Yeah.
live 10 years longer.
And you're absolutely right about that. And what I've found is that even when people put the elevators in, because you at least want to allot the space, right? You at least want to make sure that that space is allotted for an elevator. But for folks that put them in, they don't want to use them if they don't have to use them.
Yeah,
So they don't get into that habit of, pulling into the house, getting out of the car, getting into the elevator. You know what they use it for? Moving heavy items from one floor to another.
right.
And like my folks in particular, like that elevator is basically a very expensive dumbwaiter.
Yeah,
It takes the groceries upstairs when they get home from the store.
yeah,
It takes our luggage in when we go visit, and even we use it. But thinking through the functionality of it, you don't want to get into the habit. You're right. You don't want to get into the habit of using an elevator, because those stairs, those steps are really good for you.
yeah. So we've got making and actually my mom, love her, she had a friend leave her house one day and was going down the front steps, and the steps were beautiful brick, and they had the little things on the side, but not a handrail inside.
Yeah.
It's like, Mom, you and Dad need to put some handrails here, because
Yeah.
you guys are in your early 70s. You've got friends younger than you, older than you coming over here. And, a handrail makes a big difference. And so actually at the other house I was talking about before, she had some beautiful handrails that she had just put in. And I was
Yeah.
like, "Mom, here's some example, like you need to go get these." And so she actually put those in, because I was like, without a handrail, people are leaving your house, like they could tumble.
Yeah.
A handrail could make a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, these practices of inclusive design that you apply to the home, ideally people are lobbying or having some advocacy for these things in the community as well. making sure that, they're having conversations with local councils or about things like building codes, because government has a standard for accessibility. It's called the Americans with Disabilities Act. Most of you probably know about this already, so it might be rudimentary, but it's outdated, and it's really outdated. There are many parts of it that do not fit with the world that we have today. There are many things that have evolved, primarily technology, that are wildly empowering that aren't included. Basics like lighting haven't been updated to include LEDs, dimmable LEDs that we all have access to now, and are really the gold standard for brightening a space and modifying the light in a space. But that requires, some work and some hard work, because getting these types of building codes changed is a trudge. But also bringing about some awareness to the communities in which you live. Making sure that businesses there understand that older adults are a large market, and they do want to go out for coffee, and they do want to have a nice meal. But there might be barriers to that happening. And those barriers for a restaurateur, for example, can be complete blind spots. And it's everything. It's everything in a restaurant: the space between the tables, the height of the chairs, the lighting, the noise levels, the menus, whether it's the size of the font or the type of font used or the colors, whether or not you're one of those restaurants that still forces people to use a phone to snap a QR code to bring it up on your screen. These are all real barriers to people who have income and want to spend it from going into your establishment. And that is very hard for businesses to wrap their heads around, really hard for them to wrap their heads around, because I think we can argue it's been at least 2 decades now, maybe 3, is that restaurants have moved to be louder and darker, because loud restaurants feel full even when they're not. So this is going to require some culture change within the restaurant industry to say, hey, we want to get these folks, they're important. But we are starting to see some interesting things happening with some restaurateurs across the country. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that on the earlier side of dinner, they're offering quieter experiences where, like, the noise levels are just lower than they would be from a standard perspective. That opens up a whole host of people to come in. And it's not just older adults that might not like noise. There are scores of neurodivergent people where noise is a barrier for them to go into any space. So it's really opening the door up for more people to come in, to enjoy, to spend money. For a business, that's the number one goal: get them to spend money and get them to come back. And these businesses really, really have a huge opportunity here. Now, of course, there are some things that are going to be challenging for the foreseeable future, because so much infrastructure is built already, primarily air travel. Air travel is, my God, a barrier for folks. And if you've ever been with somebody who requires a wheelchair for their mobility needs, or may need wheelchair assistance to get onto a plane, it is a dehumanizing experience, and breaks your heart. You also have these airports, because of the size now, where you might need to walk up to 2 miles to get to your plane.
Yeah. Well, and so I have a classic example. It's almost like you've listened to my Age-Friendly Business podcast, and then I have another video where I'm talking about an experience that my daughter and I had in the airport in Charlotte, and we got off.
My least favorite airport in the country, mind you.
Yeah, it's quickly becoming mine as well. But we got off the one flight, and we go to the bathroom, and as we're coming out, she looks at her phone and she's like, oh, they changed our gate. And then I looked at my watch and I was like, and we got our upgrade. So we took off to the right gate and knew we had an upgrade when we got there.
Mm.
And as when we arrived at the gate, there were like 6 older adults there, 4 of whom were in wheelchairs. So obviously, there for the with somebody was there to assist them from the airline. And then there was another lady sitting in a chair, and a couple sitting there. And of course, we're watching them because we're interested in aging, and Olivia's even paying attention. But the one lady said after a while, she goes, my flight was supposed to leave like an hour ago. And so she got up and she made her way over there with her cane. And she's talking to the lady at the ticket counter. And the lady's like, "Oh, we changed your gate like an hour and a half ago. Your flight's already gone." But
Mhm.
because of the overhead, all the noise, and they make these announcements overhead, which you can never hear.
Mhm.
She had a paper ticket.
Yep.
So that's just an example of, the technology, and she was not in the assistance program.
Right.
And so a strategy that you can do, to circumvent that is if you know you have a paper ticket, just check in with the ticket counter lady and say, if anything changes, please let me know.
Yeah.
But I had a friend say, wouldn't it be great if you didn't have technology, or maybe you're going to a different country and you don't have like international cell service, when you got off your flight, they gave you like a beeper for your next
Yeah.
flight, and you would get an alert, and then you just give it back to the airline when you get on the next plane. But
Yeah.
sometimes it's something that's with you.
Yeah. You've really hit maybe inadvertently hit the nail on the head, is that, we're not inclusive in our design around tech. And we the broader society makes assumptions that everyone uses technology, and not everyone does. And this is a two-way street issue, in my opinion. And here's why. Um, Technology is a thing that it can empower people. It does have more efficiency in many ways. It does allow for rapid communication. But as we've seen, you can't just assume that everyone's going to have it. I mean, I think the COVID rollout is probably the greatest example of this, where the first round of people to get access to the COVID shots were the people that were over 80 years old. Yet the platforms they designed to register for the first COVID shots were all online, and some were apps within some of these states.
And
So we had this massive disconnect between the need for a shot and the ability to register for a shot. And when thinking through this, through design and how the space works and how individuals work, we have to think through that reality that a pretty significant portion of our older population is either technophobic or digitally illiterate, or has low digital literacy. That's not a negative thing. That's not to beat up on folks for not keeping up with technology. It's just reality. And I think that you can see this evidence by the fact that all these surveys have been done, especially by organizations like AARP, talking about how so many people over 65, over 80 have smartphones now. Ask yourself this question. When have you gone into a cell phone store and seen anything but a smartphone? You can't buy them anymore. So just because people have a smartphone doesn't mean that they're using it, or have the fundamental understanding to use it, especially for applications like the airlines, which they might not use very often. It's one thing to be literate about Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, because you use that every day, or perhaps your email or text function. But if you travel once or twice a year, that's foreign to you. That's foreign to you. So in the good world, you're right. Airlines would make some smart decisions. Businesses alone should make some smarter decisions about how they work with these populations that may not be kind of squarely in the middle of digital understanding and digital literacy.
right. I actually think, based on the meeting that I was just in Wednesday, there are a lot of people over the age of 80 that are actually quite proud of the fact that they are not on technology.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
think
It's a badge of honor for some people.
Yeah, it's like, these younger people, they're just on, and it was so much ageism in that meeting, by the way. I was just like, if any, the number of times they called themselves old people and I'm old, and I was just like, oh my, okay. And
I talked about this the other day. I said, can you imagine if we lived in a world where we had literacy rates that were so low as our digital literacy rates, especially for this older population, and we just send people piles of printed material? Like it wouldn't make any sense. Like we would say from a public policy perspective or a business perspective, no one would say, hey, this group of people can't read, so let's send them a bunch of reading material. No one would say that.
yeah,
No one would say that. They would say that's insanity. We would figure out some other way to do it. We would do pictographs, or we'd call them and we'd explain to them verbally or through audio. But with digital, we've got these blinders on that everyone should be digital literate, and that's just the way it is. Yet there aren't that many programs. There are some. There's, of course, what is it, OATS that ARP has, the Planet Senior, I think, Senior Planet rather. You got some other smaller ones that they're trying to build up digital literacy, but there's no school for literacy. There's no public school for digital literacy at all.
right.
We don't make that investment.
And it goes right back to Apple. Apple does offer, workshops to help people learn how to use their devices. And, you know, um, you might not see a younger person who would show up to an in-person class, because you can also do it online. But there's a lot of older, there's a lot of older adults sitting, in those classes. And then they make even the beautiful spaces. Some of the Apple stores have like the train. Yeah. So again,
but I do think, kind of one thing that I see as a real positive for the future, especially around people's interest in learning, is that YouTube across the board is the most popular channel. And it's the most popular across generations. So that indicates that there isn't a lack of interest in older populations learning. And I think people have this block that's saying, oh, older people don't want to learn. Some of the most active learners I know are over 65, and some of the most actively engaged online are over 65. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be making the effort, though, to reach those that aren't, or making accommodations to account for them. During COVID, just to cycle back to that, Singapore, very small city state in Southeast Asia, really thought through their challenge because it is such a tech-forward city state. But they do have a large population, because it's one of the place in the world with the highest longevity. They do have a population that doesn't use tech at all.
mm-hmm.
So they created alternate ways of going in and out, because you had to check in and out of businesses, because that's how they did their COVID tracking. So if you were somebody who had a cell phone, you tapped in and out. If you didn't have a cell phone, they gave you a coin, and you dropped the coin in, took it out, and that was their way of checking, actually doing the tracing in that city. And it was highly successful. But again, it just requires thinking a little bit more creatively, and not just thinking about it more creatively, but also including a diversity of people in your design process early on and often. And you can do that with focus groups, but the ideal way to do it is actually by hiring folks that are older, if you can. And we see this time and time again with big companies when they hire an age diverse population, or where they retain people for longer than retirement age, so around 65, they see improvements to their product, because they're thinking about things they didn't see before.
Right.
Getting to those blind spots.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being with me today. And I think I just saw your little kitty cat, or is it a pup?
My pup.
Yeah. I think my cat's in here with me. So let's just finish up, and did want to let people know that Bradley will be speaking at the 2024 Age Friendly Ecosystem Summit. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can register for that. And then tell us, your book is called SuperAge, and then to sign up for your newsletter, or how else can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at humanchange.com. You can sign up for the newsletter at newrulesmedia.substack.com, and you can grab my book, The SuperAge: Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, on Amazon rather, or at your local bookstore.
So thank you for joining me today. Please don't forget to go to my website, melissabphd.com/join, and you can sign up to be an AgeWise U Insider or MVP member. You can also become a member on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're joining me from today. If you have found this information helpful, please like it, leave a 5-star rating and a comment if you'd like, or just share the episode with someone that you think would find it helpful. Until next time, be well.